Let's start this off with a little thought experiment.
Huh.
If you had the opportunity to just instantly be granted the mastery of one single subject or skill with zero effort, what would you choose?
Oh, that is a classic. And most people, they instantly default to something tangible.
Right, yeah.
They want to be like a master coder, or they want to be fluent in Mandarin, or maybe play the cello like a virtuoso.
Exactly. And sure, those sound like incredible upgrades. But if you really stop and analyze the premise there, choosing a single hard skill is actually incredibly short-sighted.
It really is.
It's basically asking for a fish instead of the fishing pole. The ultimate hack to this scenario, really the only rational choice, is to ask for the ability to learn how to learn.
Because it is the ultimate meta skill. Human knowledge isn't static, right?
Not at all.
That coding language you just wish to master, it'll probably be obsolete in 5 years anyway.
Yeah, good point.
But if you possess the optimized neurological framework for rapid learning, you don't just get one wish, you effectively have infinite wishes.
Which is just a crazy concept to wrap your head around.
It is. You can apply that exact same underlying algorithm to languages, to music, to complex problem solving, even to entirely new disciplines that haven't even been invented yet.
And that is exactly the driving mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from a really massive stack of sources today.
Yeah, a lot of ground to cover.
Tons. We've got a diverse collection of audio and video transcripts, some of them actually spanning both English and Hindi, and they all summarize the core principles of this book called Limitless by Jim Kwik.
Right. And the author is, he's recognized globally for training the minds of top-tier CEOs, actors, academic elites, you name it.
But what we are going to do today is not just some simple book report. We really want to deconstruct the biological and the psychological mechanics of his entire framework.
We kind of have to, right? Because the foundational premise of all this source material is that most of us are operating under this trance of mass hypnosis.
That's a great way to put it.
It's this pervasive, deeply ingrained cultural programming that insists human intelligence is just this fixed, immutable trait.
Like you're just born with what you've got.
Exactly. It's the prevailing narrative that suggests you are handed a specific cognitive ceiling at birth. And, if you don't possess innate genius, your only option is to compensate with grueling brute force effort.
This sounds exhausting.
It is. And our goal today is to completely dismantle that narrative. We are going to provide a specific, scientifically backed blueprint for upgrading your mental hardware and software.
And we do that by optimizing 3 intersecting nodes, right? Mindset, motivation, and methods.
Precisely.
I really want to address you, the listener, directly here, because whether you are navigating some massive project at work and just feeling paralyzed by the sheer volume of data, or maybe you find your attention span fracturing after just a few minutes of deep work.
Which happens to all of us.
Oh, constantly. Or maybe you simply want the cognitive stamina to just read faster and actually retain what you read. Well, this deep dive is designed to reconstruct how you process reality entirely.
But to understand the sheer power of this methodology, we have to look at its origin.
We really do.
Because the architect of this system, this man who now teaches cognitive optimization to actual billionaires, he spent his entire childhood convinced his brain was fundamentally broken.
Yeah, the origin story here provides such crucial context. It really highlights the extreme plasticity of the human brain.
It does.
So the inciting incident here occurred when the author was just in kindergarten. He was a highly energetic kid, obsessed with comic book superheroes.
Specifically the X-Men, I think.
Right, because they represented outsiders whose differences were actually hidden powers. So anyway, one afternoon, a fleet of fire trucks rushes past his school.
And obviously, total chaos ensues.
Right. The teacher points them out, and naturally, a room full of 5-year-olds scrambles to the windows. But he was too short to see over the ledge.
So he improvises.
Exactly. He grabs his chair, drags it to the window, and wedges it right next to this massive cast iron radiator.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He climbs up, and for a brief moment, he's just captivated by the scene outside. But the environment is chaotic. Another child accidentally bumps the leg of his chair.
And he loses his balance.
He falls head first, colliding violently with the iron radiator.
Right.
Bad. He sustains a severe traumatic brain injury that requires an emergency hospital visit.
And the physical trauma was severe, but the cognitive and psychological fallout was permanent. Or, at least it appeared permanent for a very long time.
Yeah, his mother documented a complete personality shift.
He essentially transformed from a vibrant, curious child into someone really withdrawn and anxious. his memory degraded significantly.
He completely lost the ability to sustain focus.
And while his classmates were, rapidly progressing into reading, he spent 3 agonizing years just trying to decipher the alphabet.
It's just the classic narrative of the struggling student. But it was compounded by this really specific, awful moment in elementary school.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah, a teacher who was clearly frustrated with his inability to grasp a lesson points at him right in front of all his peers and declares, "That's the boy with the broken brain."
I mean, that is just devastating. In behavioral psychology, we study a phenomenon known as the Pygmalion effect.
Okay, what is that exactly?
It dictates that expectations, especially from authority figures, directly influence performance. Yeah, when a teacher or a parent assigns a label to a child, they aren't just making an observation, they are actually defining the boundary conditions of that child's potential.
Wow. So the label, the boy with the broken brain, acted as a sort of psychological straitjacket?
Exactly. It wasn't merely an insult, it literally became his internal operating system.
Every failed test, every single moment of confusion was instantly rationalized by this new identity. I mean, why try harder when the hardware is supposedly fundamentally broken?
Right, so he internalized the limitation. He spent his entire academic career utilizing the strategy of invisibility.
Shrinking to the back of the room, avoiding eye contact.
Terrified of being called upon. So he barely manages to graduate high school. But he decides to attempt college, hoping maybe a new environment might reset his trajectory.
He really wanted to validate his family's sacrifices, but the cognitive demands of higher education just completely crush him.
Yeah, he's failing his classes, he's financially depleted, and he finally decides he just has to drop out.
But right before he finalizes the paperwork, a friend convinces him to spend the weekend at his family's home, just to gain some distance from the situation.
And during that visit, the friend's father pulls him aside for a conversation.
And he doesn't just offer, superficial encouragement.
No, instead, he asks these really fundamental probing questions. Things like, why are you in school? What is the actual objective here? What do you want to contribute to the world?
And the author just completely breaks down. He recounts the radiator incident, all the struggles, the whole broken brain label.
But the father stops him. He hands him a piece of paper and demands he write down his ultimate goals.
The things he wanted to achieve for his family that seemed entirely impossible.
Right. And after he writes them, the father takes the paper, holds his index fingers about a foot apart, and says, "You are only this far away from everything on this list."
Which is such a powerful image. The author assumes he means the distance between effort and success, right? Which just feels like an insurmountable gulf to him.
But then the father moves his hands and places his fingers on either side of the author's head. And he says, "The key is right here. Your brain."
Wow. And then he physically walks him into this massive home library filled with biographies of historical anomalies. Einstein, Da Vinci, Edison.
Alongside all these early texts on human potential. And he issues a challenge. He tells him to read one book from this library every single week.
Which, for a young man who still suffers immense anxiety just looking at a single page of text, I mean, this is a monumental task.
But the father does something really critical here. He reads the author's list of dreams out loud. Yeah, hearing his own deeply held, impossible goals vocalized by an external voice, it triggers a profound shift in his neurochemistry. It anchors him to a purpose that overrides all that anxiety.
So he actually returns to college with this crazy dual mandate. He's got his standard coursework plus this new self-imposed library curriculum.
It is a completely unsustainable equation.
Totally. To find the time, he just cannibalizes his sleep, his nutrition, his social life. He isolates himself in the university library for days on end.
And eventually, his biology just overrides his willpower.
He collapses. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. He actually tumbles down a flight of stairs and suffers yet another head injury.
Which is just tragic. He regains consciousness in a hospital bed 2 days later. He is severely malnourished, weighing barely 117 pounds.
By all metrics, he has hit absolute rock bottom.
But historically, moments of severe system failure are often the exact catalyst required for profound paradigm shifts.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. A nurse brings him a mug of tea, and printed on the side of this mug is a quote attributed to Albert Einstein.
We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them.
And that single sentence just completely reframes his entire reality. He realizes his fundamental error. He had been attempting to brute force his way through learning.
Yeah.
If I can introduce a little analogy here, it is exactly like trying to run a massive, complex, modern software suite, say, like a 2024 video editing program, on a dusty, unupdated 1995 desktop computer.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
Right. You can hit the render button as hard as you want. You can stay up all night staring at the screen, but the system is going to crash because the foundational operating system is completely incapable of processing the instructions.
And the traditional education system is exactly that outdated OS.
Yes.
It is a highly accurate assessment of the pedagogical landscape.
Yeah.
Look at the history of standardized education. It was heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution.
Right. Factories and assembly lines.
Exactly. The objective was not to create hyper-adaptive, creative problem solvers. The objective was to mass-produce compliant workers who could follow instructions and just memorize specific data points.
So schools are incredibly efficient at delivering the content, right? The historical dates, the geometric proofs, the vocabulary words.
But they completely omit the mechanics of learning. They provide the software, but absolutely zero instruction on how to upgrade the hardware to actually run it.
We are issued the most complex, sophisticated computational device in the known universe, the human brain, and we are literally never given the user manual.
It's absurd when you really think about it.
So once the author recognized this structural flaw, he pivoted. He stopped studying his coursework and he started studying the brain itself.
He dove into neuroscience, adult learning theory, memory mechanics, speed reading. He essentially reverse engineered his own cognitive processes.
And within months, he began to repair the damage. His focus stabilized, his recall became almost photographic, and his processing speed just multiplied.
His transformation forces us to confront a pretty stark biological reality. The human brain possesses latent computational power that we are barely utilizing at all.
But this introduces a massive contradiction, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if we possess this limitless neurological potential, why is the modern human condition defined by cognitive fatigue? Why is our collective attention span degrading so fast?
Yeah.
Why do we feel this constant low-level anxiety regarding our ability to just process the world around us?
The answer lies in our environment. We are no longer navigating the natural world. We are navigating a synthetic digital ecosystem that is quite literally designed to exploit our biology.
Yeah, the sources categorize these environmental threats as the 4 digital supervillains.
Which I love as a concept.
Right. And these aren't just abstract ideas. They are specific engineered forces actively degrading our cognitive function every single day.
So let's break them down. The first of these systemic threats is digital deluge. This refers to the sheer, incomprehensible volume of data we are subjected to constantly. Consider that a modern professional consumes more raw data in a single afternoon than a human living in the 15th century would process in their entire lifespan.
That is staggering.
We are operating in a state of chronic information overload. The sources highlight an interview with technology correspondent Matt Richtel, who introduces a really crucial biological distinction here.
What's that?
For decades, we adopted technology under the assumption that all information is inherently beneficial.
Right. More information is always better.
Exactly. But Richtel argues that we must start viewing digital consumption through the exact same lens as nutritional consumption.
Oh, interesting.
There is technology that functions like Brussels sprouts. It challenges you, it nourishes your intellect, and it requires actual cognitive digestion.
Right.
And then there is technology that functions like Twinkies.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Hyperpalatable, heavily engineered, empty-calorie data. It provides a quick dopamine spike, but ultimately degrades your mental health if you consume it in high volumes.
That nutritional framework is so vital because our working memory has a strict biological limit. We can really only hold a few chunks of information at a time.
And we are constantly bombarding it with Twinkie data.
Furthermore, we have to factor in the half-life of information.
Right. The speed at which facts become obsolete.
Exactly. In fields like medicine or technology or finance, the facts are constantly updating. A study is published, and then 18 months later, some meta-analysis completely disproves it.
So not only are we processing a deluge of data, but we are also forced to constantly overwrite our existing knowledge base.
The brain is burning immense amounts of glucose just trying to decipher what is actually true and what is obsolete. It is exhausting.
Which leaves us highly vulnerable to the second threat, digital distraction.
Right.
The core issue here is the complete eradication of downtime from the human experience.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit. What do we actually mean by downtime?
Okay, what's your definition?
Because If I'm standing in a 15-minute line at the DMV and I pull out my phone to scroll through a news feed or watch a video, I honestly feel like I'm utilizing my downtime efficiently. I'm being productive, or at least entertaining myself.
Well, you are avoiding boredom, certainly, but you are actually destroying your downtime.
Really?
To understand why that is dangerous, we have to look at the neurobiology of attention. When you are staring at a screen, your brain is engaged in active processing.
Okay.
When you put the screen away and simply stare at the wall or just walk without headphones, your brain doesn't just switch off. It activates the default mode network, or the DMN.
The DMN. Yes.
The DMN is the neural circuitry responsible for synthesizing disparate ideas, autobiographical memory, and future planning. It is literally where your aha moments are generated.
So by constantly feeding the brain new input, we never actually allow the DMN to process the input we've already received.
Precisely. The sources cite a really profound study from the University of California observing the memory mechanics of rats.
Oh, I read about this.
Yeah, researchers introduced rats to a novel experience, navigating a new maze, and they monitored their brainwaves. What they discovered was that the actual formation of the memory didn't occur while the rat was in the maze.
Really?
No, it occurred during the subsequent downtime. While the rat was resting, the hippocampus literally replayed the neural sequence of the maze backward and forward, locking the new information into the long-term memory cortex.
Wow.
So by eliminating downtime in our own lives, we are actively interrupting our brain's ability to consolidate memories. We are continually training our distraction pathways while allowing our focus and synthesis pathways to atrophy.
That seamlessly explains the mechanics behind the third threat, which is digital dementia.
Yes.
This term was actually coined by neuroscientist Manfred Spitzer, and it describes the cognitive degradation that occurs when we outsource our memory to external smart devices.
Think about spatial navigation. 10 years ago, you had an internal map of your city. You knew the cardinal directions, landmarks, alternative routes.
Yeah.
Today, you just blindly follow the turn-by-turn instructions of a GPS.
But my question is, isn't cognitive offloading a good thing? I mean, if my phone remembers my schedule and my navigation, doesn't that free up my biological RAM for higher-level creative thinking?
That is the common defense, yes, but the neurological evidence completely contradicts it.
Interesting.
The brain does not operate like a computer hard drive that has a finite storage capacity where deleting an old file makes room for a new one.
Okay.
The brain operates strictly on the biological principle of use it or lose it. Neuroplasticity. Memory is a muscle. So when you utilize GPS daily, you are starving your hippocampus of the specific stimuli it requires to maintain spatial mapping networks.
So synaptic pruning occurs.
Exactly. The brain realizes, hey, we no longer use these pathways to navigate, and it literally dismantles them. Outsourcing your memory doesn't free up your brain. It weakens the structural integrity of your cognitive architecture.
That is terrifying. We are engineering our own cognitive decline. Which brings us to the final villain, digital deduction.
Nice.
If digital dementia is outsourcing our memory, digital deduction is outsourcing our critical reasoning.
Psychologist Jim Taylor has written extensively on this exact phenomenon. True thinking, the kind that actually requires the prefrontal cortex, involves reflecting on a problem, reasoning through variables, weighing contradictory evidence, and synthesizing a unique conclusion.
Which is hard work.
It is a highly energy-intensive process.
But algorithms have made it completely effortless to skip the process entirely. I mean, if a complex geopolitical event occurs or some controversial policy is announced, most people do not read the primary source documents and formulate an independent thesis.
No, they don't.
They open a social platform, locate an influencer or a publication that aligns with their pre-existing biases, and they simply adopt their conclusion.
We let the algorithm do the deductive heavy lifting.
Right. And over time, the prefrontal cortex, the actual seat of our executive function and critical thought, loses its agility. We become reactive consumers of opinion rather than active generators of insight.
So we are facing a deluge of data, a distraction from synthesis, dementia of our memory, and deduction of our reasoning.
A lot to fight against.
To survive and thrive in this ecosystem, incremental improvements are just insufficient. You cannot merely tweak your habits. You require a fundamental structural upgrade.
And that upgrade is the limitless model.
Exactly.
It is a framework constructed of 3 intersecting domains: mindset, motivation, and methods. If any one of these domains is compromised, the entire system fails.
We absolutely must begin with the bedrock of the framework, which is mindset. Mindset is the fundamental belief system dictating what you accept as possible.
It is the invisible governor on your potential.
If you deeply believe you are incapable of learning a language, no speed reading method or dopamine hack will help you. Your brain will subconsciously sabotage the effort to maintain consistency with your belief.
And the sources identify the primary enemy of a limitless mindset as LIES, Limited Ideas Entertained.
An incredibly useful acronym. Limited ideas entertained are essentially societal fictions that we accept as neurological facts.
Right.
To illustrate how powerfully these LIES constrain us, the author shares a pivotal observation from his youth.
Oh, the restaurant story.
Yes, he was at a restaurant with a large extended family group, dozens of people, and a waitress approached to take their orders.
Now, in a group that large, the orders are notoriously complex. People are requesting specific dietary modifications, side substitutions, precise meat temperatures.
And the author, who was still deeply trapped in his broken brain identity at the time, watched her closely. He realized she wasn't carrying a notepad.
She was simply listening.
Right. He assumes she is going to fail catastrophically because his LIE tells him that the human working memory can only hold about 7 items at a time.
There is no biological way she can retain the variables of 25 distinct meals.
Yet when she returns, the execution is absolutely flawless. Every drink, every modified salad, every specific steak temperature is delivered to the exact correct person.
That is mind-blowing.
And she didn't rely on rote memorization, repeating the items over and over. She was utilizing advanced encoding techniques, likely spatial or associative memory, anchoring the complex data to the specific faces or locations at the table.
Watching her perform that level of cognitive gymnastics completely shattered his framework of reality. It was a visceral demonstration that the limitations he placed on his own brain were entirely fabricated.
It's a perfect example of breaking through learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness. Can you explain that a bit more?
It's a foundational concept in behavioral psychology. A biological organism, after experiencing repeated, unavoidable stress or failure, will eventually cease trying to escape or succeed, even when a clear path to success is later presented.
They internalize the lack of control.
Yes, exactly like the classic analogy of a baby elephant tied to a small stake.
Oh, I know this one. By the time it's an adult, it has the immense physical strength to pull the stake out easily.
But it doesn't try, because it learned it was helpless when it was small.
I think about this like a high-performance sports car engine. Let's say you buy a car with a massive turbocharged V8 engine capable of hitting 200 miles per hour. But the manufacturer installs a software governor on the engine control unit that cuts the fuel supply the moment the car hits 60 miles per hour.
Right.
You can press the accelerator to the floor. The engine has the mechanical capacity to go faster, but the software dictates a hard limit. Learned helplessness is the software governor on our brains.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And one of the most restrictive governors we install in our children is the standardized definition of genius.
Yes. The modern educational and corporate infrastructure heavily indexes human intelligence to a single metric, the intelligence quotient, or IQ,
which primarily measures spatial, mathematical, and linguistic logic under timed constraints. If your neurological wiring does not perfectly align with that specific testing format, you are categorized as average or below average.
The Limitless framework violently rejects this homogenization. Drawing on multiple models of multiple intelligences, it categorizes cognitive optimization into 4 distinct genius profiles.
Let's break down the mechanics of these 4 profiles, because identifying your default operating system is critical to unlimiting your mindset.
First up, we have the dynamo genius.
Right.
These individuals operate with high divergent thinking. Their brains are incredibly adept at generating novel ideas, recognizing abstract patterns, and conceptualizing things that do not yet exist.
They often have high resting state connectivity in the brain's creative networks. Shakespeare was a dynamo in language. Galileo was a dynamo in conceptual physics.
They don't just process reality. They invent alternatives to it.
Second, we have the blaze genius. This profile is characterized by an exceptional density of mirror neurons and hyper-developed social-emotional circuitry.
Okay, so very people-focused.
Extremely. They possess an innate ability to read micro-expressions, regulate group dynamics, and communicate with profound empathy. Their intelligence is relational.
Oprah Winfrey is a classic blaze genius. Malala Yousafzai operates in this domain too. They absorb and transmit human experience at a level that mathematical logic simply cannot quantify.
Third is the tempo genius. These are the operational anchors of society.
The steady ones.
Exactly. Their cognitive strength lies in their executive function and their ability to delay gratification. They possess a massive capacity for maintaining a long-term macro-level vision.
Often remaining completely grounded while dynamo geniuses are, spinning into chaos.
Right. They understand timing, sequence, and endurance. Nelson Mandela demonstrated supreme tempo genius, holding a cohesive vision for a nation across decades of isolation.
Mother Teresa was a tempo genius, operating with relentless, steady consistency in the face of overwhelming micro-level suffering.
Finally, we have the steel genius. These individuals possess a neurological architecture optimized for high signal-to-noise ratio in sensory and data processing.
So they excel at managing complex systems, right, identifying micro-level inefficiencies, and analyzing vast quantities of variables.
They don't need to invent the vision, they build the structural scaffolding to make the vision function. Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, exhibits massive steel genius.
He looked at the chaos of the early internet and designed an elegant, data-driven algorithm to index human knowledge.
The profound takeaway here is that if you are a blaze genius, highly empathetic and relational, but you are forcing yourself to study or work using the rigid, data-heavy methods of a steel genius, you will constantly feel friction.
You will feel broken.
You aren't broken, you are just running the wrong software for your specific hardware.
And that hardware is constantly evolving. To fully unlimit the mindset, we must address the biological reality of neuroplasticity. The brain is not a static organ. We can observe this mechanically.
Yes, the sources reference the landmark neuroimaging study conducted by University College London on the city's taxi drivers.
This study is just incredible. To drive a black cab in London, you can't use GPS. You have to pass an exam called the knowledge.
It requires memorizing a staggering labyrinth of 25,000 individual streets and tens of thousands of landmarks.
It takes years of intense, deliberate study.
The researchers placed these drivers into fMRI machines and compared their brain structures to a control group. What they discovered was that the posterior hippocampus, the specific cortical region responsible for spatial memory and navigation, was physically measurably larger in the taxi drivers.
Wait, physically? Like it actually gets bigger?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the longer they had been driving, the larger the hippocampus had grown.
So it physically expanded. Just like a bicep hypertrophies under the stress of weightlifting, the brain structurally reorganizes itself under cognitive load.
When you engage in deep learning, you stimulate the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. It acts like fertilizer for the brain,
Promoting neurogenesis, which is the birth of new neurons, and strengthening synaptic connections. Your brain is a malleable architecture.
But the architecture actually extends beyond the skull. The deep dive sources introduce a critical biological component that most cognitive frameworks ignore entirely.
The enteric nervous system.
Yes, often referred to as the second brain.
I really want to spend some time on this because it bridges the gap between abstract psychology and hardcore biology. The enteric nervous system isn't a metaphor. It is a massive, complex network of over 100 million neurons embedded in the lining of your gastrointestinal tract.
And it communicates constantly with the brain in your head via the vagus nerve.
Vagus nerve is essentially a high-speed fiber optic cable running from your gut to your brainstem, and the traffic on that cable is incredibly heavy.
What's vital to understand is that the microbiome in your gut is responsible for producing the vast majority of your neurotransmitters. For instance, an estimated 90% of your body's serotonin.
90%.
Yes, 90%. And that's the neurotransmitter responsible for mood regulation, focus, and executive function. It is manufactured in the gut, not the brain.
So when we experience brain fog or an inability to concentrate, we immediately assume it's a software problem. We think we just need a new productivity app or more willpower.
But very often, it is a hardware problem located in the gut. If you are consuming a highly inflammatory diet, those Twinkie data equivalents in physical food, you are disrupting the microbiome.
You are literally shutting down the manufacturing plant for the neurochemicals required for high-level thought.
Furthermore, an inflamed gut triggers a systemic stress response, elevating cortisol levels. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid that, when chronically elevated, crosses the blood-brain barrier and binds to receptors in the hippocampus.
Over time, high cortisol physically shrinks the hippocampus.
Yes, destroying your capacity for memory and learning. Therefore, unlimiting your mindset requires unlimiting your biology.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. We have established that our brains are neuroplastic, meaning we can upgrade the hardware.
Right.
We have identified our specific genius profile, meaning we know what kind of operating system we run best, and we understand the gut-brain axis, so we know how to fuel the machine. We have the mindset.
But a high-performance engine sitting in the driveway isn't going anywhere. It requires an ignition system. It requires the second domain of the limitless model, motivation.
Motivation is universally misunderstood, don't you think?
Completely. The cultural narrative suggests that motivation is an innate personality trait, that you either possess the willpower to succeed or you are fundamentally lazy.
But the limitless framework redefines motivation not as a trait, but as a specific calculable formula.
Motivation equals purpose plus energy plus small, simple steps.
Let's dissect that formula. Purpose is the foundation. But purpose isn't a vague desire like, I want to be rich or I want to learn French.
Purpose is visceral. It is tied to consequences and identity. When the author was in the library, his purpose wasn't getting good grades.
His purpose was providing for a family that had sacrificed everything for him. Purpose is answering the question, who is counting on me to acquire this knowledge?
Exactly. Purpose provides the direction, but energy provides the velocity. We just discussed the biological reality of the gut-brain axis.
Right. Energy requires sleep optimization to flush neurotoxins from the brain. It requires stress mitigation to lower cortisol, and it requires a nutrient-dense diet to synthesize neurotransmitters.
If you lack physical energy, your brain will ruthlessly prioritize biological survival over cognitive expansion.
So you have the why, which is purpose, and the fuel, which is energy. But to create actual momentum, you must execute the final variable. Small, simple steps.
This is where we transition into the behavioral mechanics of habit formation. The sources rely heavily on the research of James Clear, who popularized the four-stage model of the habit loop.
The habit loop consists of the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. Every single behavior you execute is driven by this neurological sequence.
The cue triggers your brain to recognize an opportunity. The craving is the neurochemical anticipation, specifically the spike in dopamine that occurs before you act, driving the desire.
The response is the actual behavior. And the reward is the final satisfaction that reinforces the loop for the future.
If you want to master your motivation, you have to intercept this loop. You don't try to overpower a bad habit with sheer willpower at the response stage.
No, you design your environment to eliminate the cue entirely. Or, conversely, you manufacture friction.
If your goal is to learn a new language, but your habit is scrolling social media, you don't just tell yourself, stop scrolling.
You delete the app,
Yeah.
adding massive friction to the response phase of that bad habit. And you place your language textbook directly on your keyboard, making the cue for the good habit unavoidable.
By mastering the habit loop and aligning it with high energy and deep purpose, you can occasionally unlock the absolute pinnacle of human cognitive performance, the flow state.
Flow. This is the holy grail. It's that psychological state where you are so deeply immersed in a task that your sense of self vanishes.
Time dilates. Hours feel like minutes.
Your internal critic goes completely silent, and your performance metrics skyrocket. It is highly addictive.
From a neurological perspective, flow is characterized by a phenomenon called transient hypofrontality. Transient meaning temporary, hypo meaning less, frontality referring to the prefrontal cortex.
So the highly analytical self-monitoring part of your brain literally powers down.
Simultaneously, your brain releases a potent cocktail of 5 neurochemicals: norepinephrine for focus, dopamine for pattern recognition, anandamide for lateral thinking, serotonin for well-being, and endorphins for pain resistance.
It is maximum cognitive efficiency.
Yeah.
But let me challenge this concept for a second. Because the description of flow, losing track of time, deep immersion, shutting down the inner critic, well, that sounds exactly like what happens when I sit on the couch and binge watch 5 hours of a gripping television drama.
I see what you mean.
Am I in a flow state then? Because I don't feel like I'm lacking motivation. I am highly motivated to click next episode. How is that different from productive flow?
That is a very critical distinction. Binge-watching television is a state of passive consumption. It relies on exogenous stimuli like the rapid cuts, the engineered cliffhangers to artificially trigger dopamine release.
So I'm not doing the work.
Right, you're not generating the neurochemical cocktail. The screen is extracting it from you. True, productive flow requires active generation, and the sources detail specific mechanical prerequisites to enter a genuine flow state.
Let's lay out those prerequisites, because this is how we redirect that TV watching motivation into skill acquisition. First and foremost, you must eliminate all external distractions.
You cannot achieve transient hypofrontality if a notification buzzes on your wrist every 4 minutes.
Every interruption pulls you out of the deep neural circuitry and forces your prefrontal cortex to reactivate and assess the threat or novelty.
Second, you must establish clear, hyper-specific goals. I am going to work on my business is too vague. The brain doesn't know how to allocate resources.
But saying, I'm going to write the 500-word introduction to my investor pitch, gives the brain a precise target to lock onto.
Third, and perhaps most importantly, the task must strike the perfect balance between challenge and skill.
This is the Goldilocks zone. If the task is too easy, like watching television, your brain becomes apathetic and bored.
If the task is exponentially harder than your current skill level, like trying to read advanced quantum physics when you haven't mastered algebra, your amygdala triggers an anxiety response.
Releasing cortisol and destroying your focus, the task must sit precisely at the bleeding edge of your current capability. It must require you to stretch just slightly beyond your comfort zone.
Fourth, you must allocate sufficient time. Flow is not an instant switch. It generally requires an uninterrupted block of 90 to 120 minutes.
Because it takes the brain roughly 15 to 20 minutes of intense focus just to overcome the initial friction and trigger the neurochemical cascade.
And finally, the task must possess intrinsic value. It must align with the purpose we defined earlier.
Excellent. So let's review the architecture again. We have optimized the hardware by shattering our LIEs and embracing neuroplasticity. That's mindset.
We have fueled the engine by managing our gut-brain axis, mastering our habits, and accessing flow states. Motivation.
We are strapped into the rocket and the engines are firing. But where are we aiming? We need the navigation system. We need the final tactical domain of the limitless model, methods.
This is where we completely overwrite the obsolete 1995 software we were handed in school. Even with limitless mindset and motivation, if your method of learning is reading a textbook passively and highlighting sentences, your retention will be abysmal.
The author introduces a comprehensive framework for accelerated learning known by the acronym FASTER.
Let's deep dive into the mechanics of the FASTER method.
The F stands for forget, which, this seems entirely paradoxical when the goal is memory acquisition.
It does, but it refers to achieving cognitive flexibility. You must deliberately forget 3 things. First, forget your existing assumptions about the topic.
If you approach a subject believing you already understand the basics, your brain will actually filter out novel information to confirm its existing bias. You need a beginner's mind.
Second, forget situational distractions. Compartmentalize your external anxieties. And third, temporarily forget your limitations.
The A stands for ACT. Traditional education is a spectator sport. The teacher broadcasts, the student passively receives.
But human neurobiology is designed for the generation effect. The brain assigns higher value to information it actively generates rather than passively consumes.
You must treat learning as an aggressive active verb. Don't just read. Take notes, formulate questions, debate the premise, draw diagrams.
Which perfectly transitions to the S, which stands for state. This is arguably the most profound mechanical shift in the entire framework. All learning is state-dependent.
Here is the neurological equation. Information multiplied by emotion equals long-term memory.
The mechanism behind this equation involves the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is the brain's emotional processing center.
Right.
When you experience a heightened emotional state, whether it's profound joy, intense curiosity, or even deep fear, the amygdala activates and essentially tags the surrounding sensory information with a chemical marker.
The hippocampus recognizes this marker and prioritizes the consolidation of that specific information into long-term storage, assuming it is crucial for future survival. This perfectly explains why rote memorization fails. I can't remember the periodic table of elements from high school chemistry, despite staring at it for hours.
Because your emotional state was 0. You were bored to tears.
Exactly. The hippocampus discarded the data. But I can perfectly recite the lyrics to a random pop song I heard at a school dance when I was 13. Why? Because my emotional state was off the charts. I was anxious, excited, highly stimulated.
The amygdala tagged the lyrics, and the hippocampus locked them in. If you want to learn faster, you have to deliberately manipulate your physical and emotional state before you sit down to study.
Moving to the T in faster. Teach. When you consume information with the explicit intention of teaching it to someone else tomorrow, you actually alter your encoding process.
This is known as the protege effect. Your brain stops looking for isolated facts to memorize and starts looking for underlying structural concepts to explain. You naturally organize the data more logically.
Next is E for enter. This is purely logistical, but totally vital. Enter it into your calendar.
We schedule meetings, we schedule dental cleanings, but we treat deep learning as something we will do when we find the time.
Time is never found. It is allocated. If the learning block is not protected on a schedule, the friction of the day will inevitably override it.
Finally, the R stands for review. This is the mechanical countermeasure to the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered that the human brain will discard roughly 70% of new information within 24 hours if it is not accessed again.
To lock information into the neural architecture via long-term potentiation, you must use spaced repetition.
You don't review the material continuously.
Yeah.
You review it at increasing intervals. 1 day later, 3 days later, a week later.
You force the brain to execute the difficult process of recall just as the memory is beginning to fade, which tells the hippocampus, this data is still relevant, reinforce the synaptic connection.
And speaking of intervals, how we structure the specific time block of our learning session is critical. The sources strongly advocate for the Pomodoro technique.
Developed by Francesca Cirillo, the Pomodoro technique involves working in highly focused 25-minute intervals, followed by a deliberate 5-minute break.
Now, why 25 minutes? If I'm highly motivated, why shouldn't I just sit down and study a complex coding language for 4 hours straight? Why intentionally interrupt my focus?
Because sustained continuous focus actually degrades memory retention due to two cognitive biases: the primacy effect and the recency effect. The primacy effect dictates that your brain is highly proficient at remembering the information presented at the very beginning of a learning session. The recency effect dictates that it remembers the information at the very end.
So if I study for 4 continuous hours, I'll remember the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes, but I have created a massive 3.5-hour dead zone in the middle where retention plummets.
Due to retroactive and proactive interference, yes, the middle becomes a blur.
But by utilizing the Pomodoro technique and enforcing a break every 25 minutes, you are mechanically generating more beginnings and more ends.
You maximize the peaks of the primacy and recency effects, drastically reducing the cognitive dead zone. Furthermore, that 5-minute break allows the hippocampus a brief window of downtime to begin consolidating the newly acquired data, mirroring the rat maze study we discussed earlier.
It is an incredibly elegant biological hack, and it leads us to the final mechanical framework the author provides specifically for memory enhancement, the MOM framework, MOM.
Because, as we've established, memory is not a passive hard drive. The first M is motivation. We've covered this. If you don't have a compelling, immediate reason to remember someone's name or a piece of data, your brain will efficiently discard it.
The O stands for observation. This addresses the reality that most memory failures are actually attention failures.
When you are introduced to someone at a party and you forget their name 3 seconds later, you didn't suffer a memory lapse. You were never truly present.
Your internal monologue was active, you were scanning the room, your default mode network was distracted. You cannot encode what you do not observe.
And the final M stands for mechanics. These are the actual mnemonic devices and elaborative encoding strategies.
This is where you use techniques like the method of loci, also known as a memory palace, where you anchor abstract information to specific spatial locations in your mind.
Hijacking the precise spatial memory networks we talked about with the London taxi drivers.
When you combine the mindset, the motivation, and these highly optimized methods, you fundamentally alter your value in any ecosystem. You transition from a brute force worker to a high-leverage cognitive asset.
To illustrate the sheer economic and practical value of this transition, let's use an analogy. Imagine a massive multinational tech corporation. Suddenly, their primary global server cluster crashes.
Millions of dollars of commerce are halting every minute.
The standard engineering team is panicking, running diagnostics, rebooting hardware, desperately trying to apply brute force fixes to everything at once, but nothing works. Eventually, they call in an elite cybersecurity architect.
The architect arrives, calmly surveys the chaotic server room, pulls up a command terminal, ignores the noise, and methodically reviews the data architecture.
After 10 minutes of focused analysis, they isolate a single, incredibly obscure line of conflicting IP code, a 0-day vulnerability hidden among millions of lines of data.
They rewrite that single line, execute the command, and the entire global network instantly comes back online.
The corporation is relieved. They ask for the invoice. The architect submits a bill for $100,000.
The CFO of the company is outraged. He says, "You were here for 10 minutes. You typed 1 line of code. That is absurd. Send me an itemized breakdown."
The architect sends back the revised invoice. It reads, typing the line of code, $1. knowing exactly which line of code to type, $99,999.
That is the absolute essence of becoming limitless. The modern economy does not reward the volume of your physical exertion. It rewards the precision of your cognitive output.
When you optimize your brain, you develop the ability to separate signal from noise. You become the person who knows exactly which line of code to change in any complex system.
You essentially acquire a superpower. And that brings us to the philosophical culmination of the sources. We have woven superhero metaphors throughout this deep dive, but the narrative arc of every great superhero inevitably follows the monomyth, the hero's journey.
Consider the archetypes in modern mythology. Think of Neo in The Matrix or the protagonist in the film Lucy. They undergo rigorous trials, they shatter their limiting beliefs, and they unlock the ultimate capacity of their minds.
But the journey doesn't end with personal acquisition. If Neo just took his localized reality-bending powers and isolated himself on a tropical island, the narrative is a failure.
The final, mandatory stage of the hero's journey is the return. The hero ventures into the unknown, acquires the ultimate boon in this case, an optimized, limitless cognitive architecture, and then must cross back into the ordinary world to distribute that gift to the community.
At the end of The Matrix, Neo makes a phone call promising to show the rest of humanity a world without rules or boundaries.
The overarching philosophy of the Limitless framework can be distilled into 3 words: learn, earn, return.
You learn the methods to optimize your biology.
You earn the intellectual, financial, and emotional capital that results from that optimization.
But ultimately, you must return to your family, your organization, and your community to elevate them.
You've spent this deep dive mapping out the entire system. You now understand that your brain is a highly malleable neuroplastic muscle, intricately linked to the biological fuel of your gut.
You understand how to intercept the neurochemical craving of the habit loop and how to manufacture the precise challenge-to-skill ratio required to enter the flow state.
You know how to defeat the 4 digital villains by protecting your downtime and your working memory. And you have the faster methodology to execute.
The invisible software governor has been identified. The trance of mass hypnosis, the LIE that you are intellectually fixed, has been definitively broken by the science.
So as we wrap up, I want to take you back to the very beginning of this conversation. That hypothetical genie offering you the ultimate wish to learn a single skill.
You don't need the wish. You have the root access code to the operating system itself. So I leave you with this final mechanical challenge. Identify the specific complex subject you have avoided for years because your internal programming convinced you that you just weren't wired for it.
Is it higher mathematics, a foreign language, musical theory?
Now that you possess the precise biological and psychological tools to rewrite that programming, what happens tomorrow morning when you finally sit down, execute the faster method, and prove your limitations were nothing but a temporary illusion?